Welcome back. You're still tuned into a halftime report on CNBC TV18. Let's continue our discussion on single speciality hospitals. We do have Anshul Gupta of Avendus Capital joining in to discuss what his perspective is on the single speciality hospital space. Anshul, hi. Thank you very much for joining in. And it's a very comprehensive report that we just spoke about in the earlier segment. But I just wanted to start by asking you about the private equity interest in single speciality hospitals. We've seen a huge interest in multi-speciality hospitals. If you had to compare the two in terms of relative growth and relative incremental investments, where would the two stand? Multi-speciality vis-a-vis single speciality.
Sure. And first of all, thank you, Ekta, for having me on the show. So to answer your question, if you look at the private equity investment in overall healthcare space in the last decade, it's been around $10 billion, of which single specialty has been roughly 1/3 cumulatively in the last 10 years. And a lot of that has increased in the last few years, where the single specialty business models are becoming more mature, becoming more scalable. And a lot of it also has to do with how the India macros are tracking. Secondly, I would also like to point out that when you look at the multi-specialty hospital space and go back 10 years in time, it was also at a stage where multi-specialty was still developing, and a lot of private equity money went into the multi-specialty sector. So just to give you one stat, about 10 years ago, the listed market cap of all the multi-specialty hospitals in India was around $3.5 billion 10 years ago. Today, that number is north of $50 billion. So a lot of that value creation and maturity of the business models that's happened in multi-specialty, we are just starting to see that happen in single specialty, and hence there is a lot more private equity interest in the sector.
Right. Anshul, I track the consumer space, and I often draw parallels between hospitality and hospitals by virtue of the business models that there are as against the end, services that they offer. And we started out with quick service restaurants, which were multi-cuisine, etc., to cash in on the trend of all the diners wanting to eat out. And thereafter, as the industry matured, everyone was looking at single, cuisines and specializations from a restaurant standpoint as well. Similarly, this is playing out in the hospitals business. What do you think is the growth headroom here? Because, on the one hand, share of stomach is very different from share of health. And secondly, as a nation, do you think we require a lot more general hospitals, multi-specialty hospitals than single specialty hospitals?
Yes, no, absolutely. Look, that's a great observation and comment. So very much, if you look at healthcare consumption, it's in many respects a branded consumer play, and particularly so in single specialty. So you could think of single specialty as a more retail-driven, convenience-driven model for most of the single specialties, if not all, of course, whereas multi-specialty is a more destination-driven model. By that, I mean a patient would travel to a particular multi-specialty hospital for a certain type of treatment or a certain type of doctor. But when it comes to services like be it eye care, dental care, or hair and skin clinics, there's a lot of preference for localization, for neighborhood and convenience. So to your question, do we need a lot more multi-specialty in general hospitals? If you really look at from a macro level, India is still significantly underpenetrated.
Exactly.
So there is still a lot of need. However, when you further break it down into the big cities, the metro cities versus rest of India, there is a stark difference. Right? So when you see a lot of saturation and bed capacity availability, it will typically be in the top 7 cities of India and then maybe the next 20 cities. The moment you start going down further in the hinterlands, that quality care starts dwindling very fast. Right? So on multi-speciality, there is still growth, but it's likely going to come more from tier 2 plus or from localization of multi-speciality itself. So if you pick a city like Bangalore, for example, it's very localized market, right? So people from Whitefield would not like to travel and go all the way to Electronic City for any treatment, no matter how reputable a doctor or a hospital may be. So therefore, a lot of localization is happening within the multi-specialty hospitals.
Okay.
When it comes to single specialty, by definition, it's a much more localized and small format business model.
All right. Well, Anshul, I just wanted to narrow down on the competition fact of it, because now we have multi-speciality hospitals also which are focusing on single speciality, segments. Say, for example, oncology, or say Apollo, which has multiple segments which it focuses on, such as fertility, dental care, etc. Do you think that single speciality hospitals are currently under threat because multi-speciality hospitals now realize the potential, are getting on the bandwagon as well?
So, Ekta, I would put it, actually, I'll break it down into two parts. One is what you described as a supply side factor. So that's where multi-specialty hospitals are trying to increase their services or upgrade their services, particularly when it comes to the experience factor, right? Which is where a lot of single specialty setups score over multi-specialty hospitals. But at the same time, there are very strong demand side factors. By that, I mean the patient preferences, right? So if you take an example like birthing or child care, when a mother is looking for delivery, for her, it's a joyous experience. She need not, or the family need not prefer to go into a large multi-specialty hospital, but go to a maternity clinic which has a better overall experience. Right? Similarly, for eye care and a lot of other procedures, there's a lot of specialized equipment and technology that's very specific to that treatment, and that's not really useful for rest of the hospital or for multidisciplinary approach. So in hospitals as well, especially the large super specialty hospitals, their focus is driving more high RBOP or high revenue procedures, which are typically involving surgeries or overnight or longer term stays, whereas single specialty tends to be typically daycare or a few hours of procedure, and where patient experience become very important. So I would say it's actually the reverse. I think I, in fact, see a few more of what is under multi-speciality today, maybe perhaps coming into single specialty fold down the line. And example being, while oncology, the surgery part of oncology is very much the domain of multi-specialty hospitals.
Sure.
But things like chemotherapy, which requires a patient to just come to the center for a few hours, get the chemotherapy done and go home. So those kind of daycare procedures are better suited, and increasingly single specialties are taking bigger share of that from multi-specialty hospitals.
Okay, just a quick last question before we let you go, Anshul, and if you could just give us a brief answer. If amongst all of the specialities, which one would you put your money on in terms of the maximum growth potential that you could probably envisage, and maybe the highest amount of return for a private equity as well?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, it's hard to single out one, but if I were to say, look at the macro factor, I would actually put eye care as one of the factors. And very quickly, stats, India is, from its macroeconomic development standpoint, maybe where China was 15 years ago from a GDP per capita standpoint. And we have seen in China a lot of these models scale up significantly, driven by aging population, higher affordability, and also more discretionary spends in procedures like getting the refractive corrections by LASIK surgeries and such. So it's not just about getting your cataracts removed, but also lifestyle choices, which is driving a lot of growth. So I would pick eye care as one of the very exciting growth sector, as well as IVF and some of the other areas like wellness, sports nutrition, sports wellness, sports medicine, and also dermatology.
Take that point, Anshul. Thank you so much for joining in. It's an interesting discussion, but a longer conversation that this warrants, and particularly interested about the prospects of sports wellness, sports nutrition as the overall rise for activity increases across the country, and a lot of that led by people who are above the age of 30, more prone to risks and injury risks, etc. as well. We'll talk about all of this on another day, but thank you so much for joining in. Take a short break, come back, get you more on the markets, perhaps get you some stuff on the commodities arena as well, as Manisha Gupta joins in.